Welcome to the Pinelander Podcast, the official podcast of Pineland, broadcasting to you from an undisclosed location deep inside Pineland, where we discuss faith, family, finances, firearms, freedom, food, and everything else in between, with those who believe in living free and living out the values that made this country free. Hello, everyone. This is Paul Lefevre, and you're listening to the Pinelander Podcast, the podcast for America's warriors. My counterpart, Mike Blackburn, is currently in Africa, still on special assignment. Today, we're talking about the Battle of Hostomel, a key moment in Russia's defeat in Kiev, with Colonel John Spencer. He is the chair of the Urban Warfare Studies at the Modern War Institute and the host of the Urban Warfare Project podcast. John, welcome.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be back.
Awesome. On February 24, 2022, a few hours after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced the beginning of a special military operation, Russian airborne forces made an air assault on Hostomel Airport. Less than 10 kilometers from Kiev, the airport's strategic location would serve as an air bridge for what was hoped to be a follow-on Russian decapitation strike of the Ukrainian capital. However, this coup de main failed, and how it did is today's topic for discussion. Now, John, you're a recognized expert in urban warfare, and I painted the broad brushstrokes of this battle. Can you bring us into it?
Sure. So we all watched on February 24th, 2022, or before that Russia was planning and stated that they would invade Ukraine to erase Ukraine as a nationality, all these different reasons. But how they were going to do it was a mystery, as everybody saw around 200,000 forces on the borders of Ukraine, but nobody knew the exact course of action or play that the Russian military was going to take.
True.
But as we watched on TV and saw how fast the Russian forces presented themselves into Kiev, the capital, it was pretty clear to me that they were attempting like you said, a coup de main, which would be to rapidly take the capital city and take over the government and raise the Russian flag over the Ukrainian government building. And it's really, there's a lot of historical precedents to that course of action. I mean, you think about our own operations in Panama, OAF-1 in Baghdad, 2003. Yes, there is a sense that you destroy the other people's militaries, but you can create a psychological victory, which is really the definition of maneuver warfare, is the overwhelming of your enemy through maneuver to psychologically cause them to lose the will to fight. And Russia and the West, everybody has a lot of history that this type of operation, right, rapidly take the capital city, as in cognitively take it, and force the government, the military, and the people to cower to overwhelming force, shock and all of these things. And you could see that happening on the morning of February 24th. And it really leads to, although we have, people have a revisionist history about U.S. intelligence and other bodies' intelligence saying that the Ukrainians would potentially fall within 72 hours. The Battle of Hostomel is a really, me and my co-authors did multiple trips in Ukraine, interviewing, tens of leaders and people there. It's really, of course, I say that now, of course, everybody, the Ukrainians were underestimated, but the course of action that was unfolding on the morning of February 24th was a very threatening possibility that the Ukrainian government would fall in a matter of days based on the military operation that was being executed right in front of our eyes.
Yeah, no doubt. I love that moment where Zelensky, they remind him as if he didn't know the danger to his country, and all these multiple axes of advance of Russian columns coming his way, And he said, something to the effect that I don't need, a plane ride out of here. I need more ammunition. And that's an important aspect that you bring, is that psychological aspect. And I think we talked about this in our previous podcast, John. Is it seemed to the Russians, their assumption was they were going to have the repeat of 2014, and that they were just going to the Ukrainians were just going to capitulate, over this overwhelming shock and awe, but it just didn't materialize. And that
Right.
was
And it wasn't just Crimea as their own history, right? Like I said, there's a long history of source Crimea, but Czechoslovakia, Afghanistan, even
yeah,
the first Chechen War, where the Russians could, I mean, there is, militaries are made up of their history. Sometimes it's to a fault, but there
yeah.
is historical precedence that they were likely to succeed in this operation.
Yeah, you raised that in a piece that you did earlier with some of your partners. Is it was a high risk, high reward strategy that, as you said, is not atypical of some things they've done before, such as the Pristina Airport in '99, the airlift into a airport into Crimea, and then you mentioned Grozny in '94. So they it's high risk, and of course very risky, and that's an aspect of it. Just consider that. We can kind of look into how risky this really was. I mean, you had, if I understand it, it was all contingent upon the Russian VDV, the airborne forces, to take this airfield and establish an air bridge. And this is some hours into the announcement of a special military operation. And so, what are we looking at here? A few hundred Spetsnaz and Russian airborne troops?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it ends
Just a
up being
handful of
about
guys. Yeah.
300. But I mean, as we try to do in the article, for me as an old Ranger Regiment guy, airborne, um, the ideal of a joint forcible entry, airfield seizure, like you could just see it happening. Of course, the Russians spent years, the intelligence services, of trying to prepare for this operation. So yes, the airfield seizure was a critical part of a joint forcible entry. But as we try to walk through, there's also the suppression of air defenses that the West puts a very large value on. But if you remember, like even the Operation Iraqi Freedom or Desert Storm, that's weeks of air,
Mm.
taking out air defenses and command and control elements. But Russia tried to do it that morning of February 24th with, in a few hours, based on intelligence they had received and worked on very hard. But like you said, just 24 hours before, the Ukrainian military start moving things around. And this is really what I found in interviewing. Some of the stuff I couldn't believe, and then we'd have to validate. Of course, the Ukrainians were not defending on purpose, right? The president of the country, because war is politics, ordered the military to not be in defensive positions. Although there was most of the Ukrainian military, to include the defenders of Kiev, were sent east, because that's what the Ukrainians, because there is agency on both sides. The Ukrainians thought the Russians would come in like they had in 2014 through the east, through the Donbass, and take out, attempt to take that major axis of advance. And the president, even there's one brigade sitting in Kiev, about 3,000, 4,000 personnel, the 72nd Mechanized Brigade. But there's also multiple airports, right? And the Ukrainians aren't dumb, and they're getting intelligence from around the world. And there is open source reporting that the U.S. CIA director visited and warned them about their airfields, right? Because you don't have to be an urban warfare guy or even a special forces planner to know that one way to take a country is to take the capital. One way to do that is to do airfield seizures. But there's 4, if not 5, airfields around Hostomel. So which one? But there's a kind of an underground awareness that, okay, the president said we can't be out in defensive reasons. There's political reasons for that, but we can do things. And this is, interviewing the Ukrainian police generals, interviewing the personnel at some of the airfields. All you hear is about individuals trying to do the right thing and moving stuff around, from the head of the Ukrainian Air Force in Boryspil, which is another airfield, like moving the aircraft around, or just having them go to a different location, not even tell him. The artillery moving around, or even at Hostomel, which is where once the war begins on February 24th, it's quickly just, as the helicopters are seen above Kiev, that Hostomel is the airport that the Russians have chosen to be their air bridge, their airfield seizure. And by most measures, although the Ukrainians did like park, which I found interesting as an old Ranger Regiment guy, responsible for hitting the airfield, clearing it. The Ukrainians did park fire trucks and dump trucks and vehicles all over the airfields, all their airfields, as a tactic, that we all are familiar with, to block airfields so they can't be used as air bridges. But on the morning of February 24th, those 300 VDV actually successfully, get into Hostomel Airport and successfully land at the airfield.
Yeah, something you brought up too, John, I want to just circle back around, is the initial Russian attack was made by cruise missiles, if I understand. And you also mentioned this, that one of the failures of in this the Russian plan was they had these missiles were obviously predetermined, these targets, and the I think you've also brought out in your piece that the Ukrainians just simply moved their ADA, and so a lot of those ADA pieces that were assumed to be taken out were not, and then they menaced the VDV on the way in. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So, I mean, this is a kind of a telling of how hard it is to do joint operations, joint warfare, right? The Russian Aerospace Command, Air Force, basically was responsible for the fires plan to take out the enemy air defenses, and they had some success, to include electronic warfare, cruise missiles, and other assets to take out. But the Ukrainians had moved enough, right, just to start to add, as you see, as Clausewitz would talk about, as a West Point guy, the friction in war, that you can't predict all friction, but it's going to be there. So yes, the Ukrainians moved some stuff around, and even on the airfield, the local commander, right? So on the airfield that was chosen is Hostomel or Antonov Airport, which is a military airport, which we believe the Russians picked out of even not the international one, was because of its defendability, its length of its runway, things like that. But there's actually a National Guard unit assigned to that airfield, but most of that National Guard unit is gone, was shipped east before February 24th. So the only thing left are a commander, a few conscripts, around 200, literally what we would call the rear D.
Yeah,
he moved stuff around. That commander of the 4th Rapid Reaction Brigade at Hostomel Airport had made a couple decisions which become life-saving, to like, hey, go move that around, or hey, send a squad up to the ZSU, which if you did any time in, well, yeah, everybody knows it. It's just really big guns that put lead up into the sky, had moved stuff around, and they had man pads but if you really think about it, this is like one officer, a pay officer, a PAO, and about 100 plus
just
privates.
ad hoc.
Yeah.
Wow.
Who look up on the morning of February 24th, again, because there is an element of surprise here. The Russians, you give them credit. They achieved an element of surprise. They did have some effects in their kind of suppression of air defenses, but not even a good, what we would call a good amount of suppression, clearly. But they achieved some surprise, and flew their 30 plus helicopters down the Dnieper, hit a right bank. They lost 2 in the initial before they reached the airport, but
I believe
from
that,
a kind of Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, John. I believe one of the actual assault commander was his aircraft was downed. Is that correct?
I, there is some elements of that. So
Okay. I'm just
we
curious
weren't
if that had a part into it. I just believe that that may have had a part to play in some of the confusion or coordination of C2. I mean,
right.
yeah.
Absolutely. So that was, I saw that reported. We couldn't validate it based on,
Right.
just not having access to Russian. Most of them die. I mean, that's kind of the end of the story here. But most of
Yeah.
the Russians who get into the airfield die, and because this went sour, like you said, the Ukrainian defenders had enough menacing, just enough ability, and took down, just really 4 to 5 helicopters of the 34, which is, in your risk calculation, and this is a large scale combat operation. That isn't overwhelming, but it starts to add to the, like you
Yeah.
said, the plan starting to fall apart.
Yeah. And then if I understand, some of the SAMs like the IGLA, the SA-20, 24, well placed shot. That obviously is, you brought that out in your piece, that boosted the morale of those guys, just a handful of guys in the right place, and those
Yeah,
missiles not hitting the
I
right
think,
targets. And
yep. And I think that one, and we really wanted to highlight it. And when I give this presentation on the Battle of Kiev, which I've given the first group and a couple of other people, I didn't understand the gravity of the image of the one helicopter on the actual airfield that was taken down with an IGLA, which means needle. It's just a not as good a version of you know our our man
our
pads,
Stinger, yeah,
our Stinger, right?
yeah,
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 so heat sinking, but it's a good one. But this one lower enlisted Ukrainian soldier is able to take down one K-52 Alligator, which is like their version of the Apache. Like they call it like the tank in the sky kind of
yeah.
thing.
It's not supposed to be able to be taken out. It was
Right.
like super sexy. Yeah. Whoops.
But the image of that one helicopter, which I'm like, okay, fine, big deal. It's not a big deal. But that one image actually had an inordinate ability in
Yeah.
information warfare to motivate the defenders of Hostomel, and to be honest, the defenders of Kiev and Ukraine, that hey, we can actually fight back.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
think about war is a contest of will,
Yeah. No doubt.
and the fact that everybody has a cell phone. But that image of that helicopter being shot down went viral in the opening day, which is really an interesting.
Yeah. Also, the idea of the obstruction of the airfield by vehicles. I mean, brilliant.
Yes.
I mean, knowing
Yes.
I think the guy's name. Let's see, Major Rudenko. I believe that was the commander on the ground. Just knowing that, hey, it dawned on, hey, this is going to be an air bridge, or whatever.
Yep.
This is going to be a launch pad for, Kiev's, and so it just everything they have, just throwing at the Russians, and also obscuring the airfield. There's also I have a question here too. Maybe you found out is there was Ukrainian artillery that supported the small ad hoc command there, and it seems like just the artillery strikes alone, not only prevented, decimated the VDV on the ground, but also just rendered the airfield inop. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So this is the kind of the issue is I look back on my own training about how critical time is, right? So you do an airfield seizure and you get your minimum forces and you got to move out because time is not just of the essence. If you can't overwhelm rapidly, then you give a defender time to innovate, adapt.
Yeah.
And so the 4th Rapid Reaction Brigade had an artillery element, but it's really in Kiev, there's 2 artillery battalions that get thrown together on the opening days. They even rip out all the basically students of the artillery school and throw them together and create these 2 artillery battalions. But they're able to respond and start firing because, once the morning breaks, right, which they hit the airfield about 11 a.m., which is daybreak. So they didn't try to own the night, right? So there's another element there. Yeah. But the whole world knows that the Russians are at Hostomel by the morning of February 24th. There's a CNN guy interviewing and broadcast to the world. But the Ukrainians already knew it. So yeah, within the opening hours, which is really for us as thinking about the package and the design of an airfield seizure, those 300, the most elite, the Russian airborne, which is like special forces, right? It's separate. It's not like our airborne, just Spetsnaz and the airborne forces.
Right.
300 of the best of them, but they were dropped with what they could carry on their backs, and they took their objectives. But all of a sudden, artillery starts raining down on them in this open airfield. Not much they're going to be able to do, which really, if you think about even at the tactical level, like maybe you should have some type of counter artillery, maybe an air landed 105, something to more than just what you're carrying on your back to hold an airfield if you're going to need to hold it for a couple hours.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, so these 300 paratroopers and Spetsnaz, we're looking at AKs, RPKs, PKMs. That's
right.
Yeah, I mean,
and
that's
some,
it.
And some RPG,
Yeah,
and some AT systems that you see them setting up in their blocking positions. Like you're like, I know a lot of your listeners are like, this sounds very familiar, right? To hit the airfield, identified objectives, they took out the ZSU in the north. They take where the military headquarters are. Like they're taking their objectives, setting up blocking positions. They have the CNN guys interview them, and you can see them like moving stuff around, establishing blocking positions, waiting for, get this is the airland, right? This is why you have to clear the airfield as rapidly as possible, because there's heavy aircraft inbound with the main element, right? The main effort is coming.
And those were like actually in the air at the time. Is that right?
That's right. 1,000 more, basically Russian elite are on their way in transport helicopter or transport aircraft from Russia. But as the fact that the Russian or the Ukrainians are able to shoot down 5 or 6 helicopters, the Air Force is up in the sky, the artillery is starting to land on the airfield. Somebody turned off those 1,000 Russian forces on those Illusion 76 transport aircraft, and that's a critical turning point, because now you just dropped 300, which happens in war, right? You just dropped 300 of your best and just turned off their reinforcements and said, you better hold what you got.
Yeah, this is what you brought out too. I think not in this article, but maybe somewhere else. Is you compared this Russian operation to Operation Market Garden, the bridge too far, with that Arnhem Bridge being the bridge too far, and this was the counterpoint of that.
Absolutely.
And so instead of having a ground force just not able to make it, you've got these Aleutians that are not going to make it. And here's a question I had for you too, John. Is now there's been a lot of discussion about the 40, 50 kilometer long convoy, that it ran out of gas or whatever, but it seemed like that element, that ground element, was supposed to link up at some point with the supposed troops that the Aleutian airlift was going to bring. Is that right?
100%. So there's roughly 50,000 Russians who crossed the Ukrainian border on both the eastern and western side of the Dnieper, headed for Kiev. At 4 a.m., there's border cameras showing, I mean, you're talking tanks, ADA, infantry fighting vehicles, almost 50,000 troops, but they're constrained on narrow avenues of approach, right? One on the most people hear about is this 40-kilometer convoy that comes down through Chernobyl, but it gets slowed down, right? So there's actually Ukrainian SF all the way up north engaging them by like Yabonkiv and just slowing that convoy down, which can't get off the main road because the world has changed and roads lead through urban areas and it's the muddy season. But those two convoys are, especially the one on the western side of the Dnieper, is headed to Hostomel. Like that's its main target.
Right.
Was not only was Hostomel going to be an air bridge for these 1,000 forces to hit ground and punch into the city, because I don't know if we mentioned it, but this is only 12 miles from the center of Kiev. Right. This is where people don't understand, I don't think, in revisionist history, is how close the Russians were to taking or getting into the center and raising the Russian flag on top of the Capitol building. Had those 1,000 hit the ground, they would have been able to push through that little bit of resistance.
No doubt.
And then the convoy was supposed to be there so if it crossed the border at 4 a.m., it's only 76 miles from the border of Belarus down to Hostomel. That's all they had to cover was 76 miles. And it would have hit the airfield about the same time. So you can see how this was a synchronized coup de main with multiple axes of advance. But it just starts hitting friction, and the Ukrainians rise up and slow them down.
Yeah, I mean, as Clausewitz says, in war, the simplest things can be the most difficult. And yeah, absolute friction point after friction point. There's a few things you bring out, and I'm for our listeners, I'm making repeated reference to the article that John and his partners Liam Collins and Michael Kaufman put out, the Battle of Hostomel, and you can find this on the internet. And I'm making reference to that. You bring out a few points in this. One of them is just how the Russians just underrated the Ukrainians. Just how that this was a continuation of 2014. And as they had actually shown earlier to do something similar in the Crimea. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we are creatures of our habit. And to be honest, even as you look at a Western military, if you're going to do this operation like we did in Panama, but then all of a sudden there's not just a small little military force that your intelligence services reported on, there's tens of thousands of people resisting. That's going to really complicate the operation. If you weren't successful in the speed and the surprise and the violence of action that we talk about, and you didn't have enough ability to adapt, right? So this is, although I have a whole presentation on the Battle of Kiev, which is, it's all complex, but we just did enough research on the Battle of Hostomel to really point out how this key moment was a really significant factor to the overall failure and the defeat of the Russian forces in the Battle of Kiev, which saves Ukraine.
No doubt.
100% they underestimated, but even the intelligence services, right? So it's so hard to point to like but the fact that so not only was it 2014, the Maidan and the revolution and all of the U.S., NATO and training missions into Ukraine to rebuild their military. The Ukrainian police was also rebuilt, right? Because cities, when you do urban warfare against a major city, you shouldn't look at your only combatant is the military that's there, right? Because the Ukrainian police was also rebuilt, and it is impressive. And what they were able to do to take down all the basically sleeper cells and insert you basically FSB and all these that did mark targets for the military invasion that were supposed to be the holders of key routes. The Ukrainian police, again, had a vote and did a bunch of signals intelligence raids the morning of like February 23rd, February 22nd, and start to pick apart at the overall plan. So the Russians underestimated the Ukrainians, not just the Ukrainian military, Ukrainian police, and eventually the Ukrainian people who even started showing up at Hostomel. I had a little vignette where like a 76-year-old grandfather who got an RPG from the Battle of Hostomel uses it 2 days later to engage a convoy, because cities aren't just about the military. It's about the people, the infrastructure, and the actual dense urban terrain that the Russians got a rude awakening that this is really hard.
Yeah, and the people get a vote, as you said. You're right. Now, so the first wave, the first wave, you have Mi-8s, Mi-24 Hinds, the Ka-52s, supported by the Su-25s. These 300 KDV. This is Russia's, shock troops, stormtroopers. These guys get there. First wave is knocked out, right? So the first wave's out. Second wave, this is the next day, correct?
So the VDV, the 300 plus dismounted soldiers, actually get on Hostomel, secure it. It's theirs. the aircraft get turned off. So now they have to wait for hours. That gives the Ukrainian and the 200 defenders who had that, that shot down the helicopter that engaged the VDV,
Right.
they actually pull off because they run out of ammo. So there is a matter of about 4 to 6 hours that the Russians have achieved success. They have seized an airfield 12 miles from the capital, but the reinforcements get turned off, right? The aircraft that we talked about. Now they have to wait for those mounted forces to show up. Well, that 6-hour period gives Ukraine enough time to start raining down artillery and do the counterattack, right? Why do we always practice, like, even if we do a raid or whatever, is prepare for the counterattack? Well, the Ukrainians, and I talked to the Ukrainian Special Forces major who actually got the mission with a couple hour planning cycles, go counterattack Hostomel. And that's what happens. Ukrainians send everybody that they got. They airland some forces near there. They SF, and basically they call it the Hostomel shooting range. Wow. Because the counterattack hits the surrounding areas of Hostomel and just starts unloading on all these special, Russian VDV who have no cover on an airfield. Wow. And do the counterattack. And then, so by the evening of February 24th, leading into the morning of February 25th, Hostomel has all those 300 plus VDV are dead. And Hostomel is in the hands of the Ukrainians. But they have enough awareness, through satellite intelligence, everything. Those mounted forces are on their way. So they make a decision, a really good decision, like, we can't hold this. We have to pull back into our, inner defense of our layered defense. And they make a decision to crater the airfield, which I thought was really interesting. And also I had to see it to believe it. So they take the artillery that helped kill the VDV and then do a couple air bombing runs as well of the air forces left, and they cratered the airfield to take it away as an air bridge. Wow, which is pretty ingenious. And there's actually good videos of when the Russians show up, they try to fill those holes in the airfield with like dirt and stuff. And if you know anything about aircraft and airfields, that doesn't work.
That's not going to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
That is amazing. I didn't know that. I suspected that, but that's amazing. Just to not only the cratering of the airfield, the maneuvering of debris, to block the Russians' ability to use it, just blunted their ability to do that. Just completely unplugged this opportunity. Amazing,
right? Which is there's a thing in my research about urban defenses don't work. I think that's bullocks, because in this situation, there's a really good vignette of, you don't have to defeat your enemy, although they did destroy all the VDV, but there's 20,000 more Russians on the way. They bought themselves time, and by creating their airfield, they bought them a lot of time, right?
Time is a critical factor. Yeah, absolutely.
That's right, on both sides. So the Ukrainians bought themselves time, and then were able to inspire other people by resisting like this and had this success. It bought the time that they needed to do a total defense that they do later.
No doubt. And then, second wave. Wave, the Russians reinforced failure. That's what I would say. And now they've just got, overwhelming, force, 200, perhaps 200 plus helicopters from the Russian perspective. Can we give any credence to that? A lot. I've read various reports of that.
So there's 2 waves of 34 helicopters.
Okay.
That they just broke up the two chalks basically into 10 different troop carrying aircraft, the MIs. Mm-hmm. But both those waves, the first wave, 2 helicopters are down before they get near the airfield.
Got it. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So there's 2 waves, 2 objectives, right? A northern objective and a southern objective. The Russians successfully get all those in. So those 2 waves, which is very stereotypical, both have success. Even though they lost a couple helicopters in the infill, they have success.
And this, just to give everyone a perspective, if you've not seen the Anatov Airport, just looking at overhead photo, it's enormous. I mean, like you
right.
said, this is a ginormous airfield. I mean, humongous objective, and so to that level of, I mean, I don't know how much artillery they used to pock that and crater that. I mean, then the obstructing it. It's a lot of work.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they had these, which I found, as we've all started to learn how to do vehicle identification and weapon systems and all that. The Russian military, that was a science back when we all joined earlier in the military, and then the global war changes. But Ukrainians have mostly Russian Soviet artillery, but they also had what's the 203 millimeter pinion cannon. So that's just a massive
Wow.
track mounted artillery piece that they rained down on the airfield.
Yeah. I mean, they have now another thing that I saw on your this piece is I have just a question here.
Sure.
So if having these multiple axes of advance, I have to look at the Russian operational design and fault it. Being an armchair general here, that they didn't put more eggs in the basket of Hostomel. They didn't.
Absolutely.
And here's, I guess this is really my question is, I understand why the Russian battle at Hostomel failed, but that convoy, just help me understand that convoy a little bit more. What really, and this is a little bit out of the scope of what we're discussing, but what was the main failure of that convoy? Do we know?
Yeah, I mean, I think we know absolutely that it wasn't the force structure of it and the tactics it used weren't a penetrating force, right? We have these concepts even in our military right now about penetration force, right? The convoy did not expect to meet resistance.
Yeah.
I mean, we can even back it up to the most evidence shows that the entire Russian military, to include the VDV, didn't know where they were headed and what the exact operation would be.
Mm.
Now, that's not uncommon for OPSEC reasons.
Yeah.
But there's a big element of that. So even in the convoy, right, where you might have an advanced body that is your penetrating force, right, a lot of engineering assets and a lot of heavy armor and things like that. That's not what I particularly see in the faces of the formation. It almost feels like they thought this 40 kilometer, because it did stretch 40 kilometer. And again, the terrain matters. There isn't kind of like, the drive to Baghdad where they try to go through the Karbala Gap and things like that, where you could just get off the roads and head off into the desert and, avoid and bypass choke points and things like that. You're not going to do that in Ukraine or in Europe in general. Mm-hmm. Those roads are going to go through.
Not in February.
No, not in February, right? So this convoy is just ducks in a row, can't get off of it, meets resistance, because Ukrainians, like I said, were all the way north in some really mysterious stuff happening up there, slowing it down. And they weren't prepared, trained, manned for that type of contested, urbanized, constrained fight to get to where they need to go. And it never got. So this is the kind of the issue with the 40 kilometer convoys. It never got stuck per se, because on April 1st, when it got ordered to move out, it just turned around, drove away, and it was gone. It just couldn't advance forward because the Ukrainians bought themselves time, and then they started blowing the bridges and started putting out obstacles, and it just wasn't going to happen. So that convoy that was supposed to be there in a matter of hours, 3 weeks later, is still sitting on the road, unable to push forward.
Yeah, I think in my mind, I'm thinking of. I think we talked about this earlier. Is the FM5 and how it mentions this, planning and orders production, but it mentions planning pitfalls, and one of those is attempting to forecast and dictate events too far in the future. In other words, like you said, the enemy gets a vote.
That's right.
The Ukrainians got to vote, and so they just didn't. Those 88 pieces weren't there 24 hours later, and the Russians underrated, and also expected minimal resistance. And then that other aspect I see is just strange how maybe I would argue the VDV would know about this mission, but for the majority of these, conscripts on the Russian side in Belarus, they didn't know.
Nope.
That it's just a training operation. All of a sudden, now we're taking a left turn at Albuquerque and we're going into Ukraine. Just very strange. How that
No, it's very,
yeah.
Yep. And I agree with you back on the operational design. Like, look, if the taking of this coup de main is your objective, right? Taking the capital, we didn't talk about, but the Russians, when they advanced on the February 24th, advanced across 7 different axes, right? They had a body heading towards Kherson, Melitopol, Mariupol, Sumy, Chernihiv, Kharkiv. They split their forces up across 7 axes of advance because they had multiple objectives. But the principles of war and the elements of operational art are like, you have to weight the objective, the main objective, and be very clear. So you're right. That's the biggest surprise to me, even as a student of airfield seizures. Like, why did you weight everything on Hostomel? Why not try to take the other airfields as well, right? Send multiple VDV formations. Take Borisfeld, take Vasilkiv, and there's stuff going on there. Like, they actually strike them all with cruise missiles and things. But
as a non-expert, sorry, John, as a non-expert, I look at this and I see it just seemed like they wanted to shock and awe the Ukrainian administration with these multiple axes of advance. Just have them spinning. They just didn't expect that I guess the steel in the spine of Zelensky. They didn't expect that. They didn't expect the fighting prowess of those ad hoc formations. They didn't expect the Ukrainian people to have a vote, as you said, and so they made all these wild assumptions, and it just proved to be the bridge too far for them.
Absolutely. And there's one I always like to caveat with. If you understand now the Battle of Hostomel, you understand that it was only a matter of a couple hours that this fell apart. Like, when the point the VDV aren't reinforced by those air landing forces, or the convoy didn't get there. So literally, there's a 6-hour period here where Kiev could have fallen, honestly. But then there are all the mystery, right? If President Zelensky would have gotten on a plane and left, much like, let's say, although the comparisons are vastly different, but like Afghanistan, when your leader leaves, your army gets just sapped of the will to fight and the morale, let alone the people. And look, cities are mattered, and not all cities are the same, right? So if you would have tried this, if you would have been any other military, the city of Kiev has seen multiple sacks and attacks. The largest encirclement in the history of war was the 1945 Battle of Kiev, where you had 1 million-man army attacking, 1 million people attacking Kiev, and there are 450,000 defenders. The city is a vast array of complex terrain, not just urbanized, but like, underground tunnels and locks and rivers and multiple bridges, and these cities like Bucha or Pin outside that are full of veterans. Because what Red Dawn got wrong is that the veterans within the community can rise up and lead civilians. And that's what you see even at Hostomel. In that counterattack, there's a bunch of civilians and foreign fighters, like everybody and their brother is attacking the Russians at Hostomel. So you can imagine if you're a VDV, the chaos, because you have very little air support, because that starts to get taken away from you. You have no fire support. You're just, like you said, a bridge too far, trying to hold something, and it's a lost cause.
Yeah, and I think I love this vignette because you don't want to underrate or underestimate a company-sized contingent of Ukrainian conscripts that have the will to fight. You just don't want to. You don't want to write them off. And something I learned, just growing up is don't underestimate your opponent. Don't just write them off. And I think they absolutely did. And all these other details, the Ukrainian decision points, amazing, to stay and fight,
Yep.
to crater the airfield,
Yep.
to move those 88 pieces for whatever reason is that they did,
Yep.
played into their hand. The use of
To launch the
yeah,
counterattack is huge too. The
yes,
decision to launch everybody and everything you got at Hostomel, which was a risk, right? That was a risk.
yeah.
Because what if the Russians would have been
They,
preparing a second attack on a different airfield, and you just waited and just sent everything you had there? It was a risk.
yeah, and the Ukrainian presence of mind to just put everything they have into that effort
Yeah, so
is
there's a hidden story here we don't mention in the article too that is in my Battle of Kiev, is that Ukrainians also had this almost like smart city eye in the sky called Delta,
Hmm.
which is this basically situational awareness software where they integrate cameras and drones and highway cameras. All this get integrated into this one software that allows the command to see. That's a hidden hero of the Battle of Kiev as well, as this
Hmm.
Delta system that I'll be honest, I don't think we have. And I don't know if we would have been able to see with such clarity that the Ukrainian defenders of Kiev could see what was going on, right? So they
Hmm.
like the ability to see the convoy coming and know they need to pull off the airfield and not lose what minimal resources you have to defend the city.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a fantastic study. I mean, it's worth delving into. But yeah, that's fantastic. And why is this important for us to know? I mean, it's obvious. I think understand how Russia failed is important for U.S. planners, for special operations forces, so we don't recapitulate this failure. And
Absolutely.
also, let me just ask you, John, what's next? What for Ukraine's forces? What's going on? It seems that since June that they've battled a pushback, the dug in forces along the Russian forces along the so-called Surovikin line. What can
Yeah.
we expect in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of tough fighting, to be honest. And as I visit, I go every couple months, and I'll be back in November. That transitioning from defending urban terrain to attacking, but the Russians had about 9 months to build these complex trench lines of obstacles and mines. I mean, it's the most mined part of the world at this point. Uh,
Mm.
in order to do that, right, a combined arms breach. Well, so from the date of this battle we're talking about until today, the Ukrainian military grew from 100,000 to 1 million about. So
Mm.
all that building institutional forces, and then at the same time attacking along these trench lines. So as we're speaking, the Ukrainians are attempting to break through these three defensive lines called the Surovikin line, but it's actually across 1,000 miles,
Mm.
and they're trying to get a breakthrough, uh, a breach and then a breakthrough to achieve their goals, which are multiple, but so that they can achieve the strategic victory and then have this political change in the war. So you have 100 brigades of Ukrainian forces out on this line trying to break through World War One style defensive
Yeah,
lines
no doubt.
without the air power that we even had in World War One to help
Mm.
forces do combined arms breach.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it seems like in so many ways history repeats itself, and also shows the value of knowing history, uh,
Absolutely.
and knowing your Clausewitz, as you mentioned.
Uh,
You know,
yeah.
but
I mean,
yeah.
everybody likes mental models that help, like you said, like the principles of war, the elements of operational art.
Hmm.
All these things are soaked in blood, learned
Hmm.
lessons, and we
Absolutely.
like mental models. That's why I quote Clausewitz so much. It's not that, I mean, look, you got to put his experience into context, but the mental models are so relevant across time, and that's the
Absolutely.
beauty of some of that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, John, what's next for you?
So for me, is I'm headed back into Ukraine to continue my research into the Battle of Mariupol.
Mm.
Now, if you want to talk about a bridge too far, or
Wow.
um, a bunch of motivated soldiers holding and willing to die to hold a piece of ground. So
Wow.
in Mariupol, the Battle of Mariupol, which is happening at the same time as the Battle of Hostomel, in the opening moments. 3,000 just amazing warriors hold the city of Mariupol for over 80 days against 20,000 Russians.
Wow.
Which breaks apart their plan, right? Because they didn't think that the Battle of Mariupol would take that long, and 20,000 Russians were supposed to go to a different area.
Yeah.
But there were these 3,000 Ukrainians, to include the Azov regiment, who were saying, "Not on my watch.
Right.
I will hold this ground." Almost like a Thermopylae 300
Yes.
Spartans moment.
No doubt.
That I have been researching and doing interviews and piecing together what happened there. And there's actually less information about the Battle of Mariupol than anything that's going on, because they were told to surrender eventually. And there's 3,000 taken into captivity, and there's about 1,400 left still in captivity. So it's been really hard to research, but that's what's next for Spencer.
Wow. Yeah, that's going to be awesome. I'm looking forward to that and see what your analysis that comes out of that. But John, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast today. John Spencer is the chair of Urban Warfare Studies at the Modern War Institute and is the host of Urban Warfare Project Podcast. Colonel, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Pinelander Podcast. If you enjoy our unique content, please consider supporting our sponsors. SOF News, providing special operations news from around the world. It's where Paul and I go to keep abreast of what's going on within the SOF community. Check them out at sof.news. Blacksmith Publishing, been serving the warrior class since 2013. They have great titles written for warriors by warriors. If you're looking for excellent reference material or just want to unwind with a great novel, be sure to check out the bookstore located at blacksmithpublishing.com. And if you're looking for some cool Pinelander apparel, head on over to the general store located at pinelandergeneralstore.com. That's all one word, pinelandergeneralstore.com. Have a great selection of shirts, hats, jackets, sweaters, stickers, patches, artwork, and a whole lot more. Check out the store at pinelandergeneralstore.com. If you're interested in helping develop our country's next generation of warriors, please consider donating to the American Agoge Project. The mission of the project is to foster an environment producing able-bodied citizen warrior men of fine character. And we'll be officially launching the project in 2023 in celebration of Blacksmith Publishing's 10th anniversary. Until our next meeting, stay mentally and tactically smart, physically and spiritually strong, and socially astute. To each other we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. May God continue to bless Pineland.